Good afternoon and welcome everyone. The talk today is going to be delivered by Shri N. Vasudevan, Additional Principal Chief Conservator of Forest Research, Education and Training, Maharashtra State. I'll give a brief introduction of the speaker before he initiates his talk. Mr. Vasudevan is an IFS officer of 1987 batch who has served as the head of Mangrove Cell of Maharashtra since its inception in December 2012 till December 2019. He obtained his first master's in marine biology from Cochin University of Science and Technology and in 1984, and later he obtained another master's in public policy and management from Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. In 1992, he attended the International Trainers Training Program on Conservation of Mangrove Genetic Resources conducted by M.S. Swaminathan Foundation, which led to his special interest in mangroves. In his 8 years long tenure in Mangrove Cell, he has pioneered many programs for conservation of mangroves and marine biodiversity in Maharashtra. He is credited with the creation of the Mangrove and Marine Biodiversity Conservation Foundation, the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary, and introduction of several mangrove-based livelihood programs across Maharashtra. The mangrove area of Maharashtra registered a quantum jump during his tenure in Mangrove Cell. Sri Vasudevan is recipient of several awards for his contribution to mangrove and marine biodiversity conservation. This is a very small introduction that I could give of Mr. Vasudevan. Mr. Vasudevan will now start his presentation.
Okay, can we start?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, if anybody has switched on the microphone, I request you to switch it off so that, interventions will not be there. Okay, good evening to all of you on this Sunday evening. Thank you for sparing your valuable time. And what I'm going to talk about is the almost 8 years of work that I did in Mangrove Cell and how it has somewhat, developed into a model. We would like to say that if anybody feels that it has not yet developed it into a model, that person is free to call it as the Maharashtra experience rather than the Maharashtra model. But then since we have this ownership, we would like this model to be replicated by other coastal states. There are already some move towards that. And it is not as if everything was planned in advance. There was a lot of madness, but now I think a little bit of method has emerged in this madness. And this is what I'm going to talk about. I thank Wildlife and Bee Conservation Protection Foundation, led by the dynamic Mr. Shivaji Jawan, for giving me this opportunity. Basically, Forest Department's mandate was always limited to the terrestrial areas. And there are, of course, a few examples where forest departments like Andaman Nicobar or states where there are huge extent of mangroves, or there are marine national parks. Such states have not in a limited way ventured into coastal and marine biodiversity conservation. But we did it slightly differently. So that is what I'm trying to talk about in the next 1 hour. See, if you look at the extent of mangroves in Maharashtra, it is about 6.44% at present. But when we started in 2012, it was about 4% of the overall total. So it is not really substantial as compared to West Bengal or Gujarat or Andaman Nicobar Islands. But then it is not all about the extent of area that we have or simply conservation of mangroves. It is a model which involves the local community, and it is a model which goes beyond mangrove conservation into the realm of marine biodiversity conservation. And so these are areas where Forest Department has been taking very hesitant, I would say, baby steps in the past. But now things have these areas have assumed a great global significance in the recent times. It's important that forest departments reach the realm of marine biodiversity conservation the earliest. So you need changes in the policy, changes in the law, and you need to create institutions. And our humble attempt has been towards achieving this. Also, we need to find financial resources for this. In Maharashtra, we have 720 kilometers of coast, which is interspersed by many rivers and creeks and backwaters. About 28 rivers and backwaters, which are identified in the coastal area of Maharashtra. And we have about 20 species of true mangroves. And among the western states, I think Maharashtra has probably the maximum number of species, true mangrove species present. Some of them are represented only by a few trees, like Heritiera littoralis, even Cyanometra irupa. Only a few trees here and there. Xylocarpus also a few trees, which you can count in maybe 50s or hundreds. But besides marine mangroves, you have a huge marine biodiversity also. We have these species which are protected under the Wildlife Protection Act. In the Schedule 1, you have all the sharks, rays, guitar fishes, and sawfishes. And then you have the marine mammals, the dolphins, whales, finless porpoises. They're all found in our coast. And during the period in which I worked for Mangrove Cell, we have come across several cases of strandings. Some of them were very difficult situations where huge whales got stranded on the beaches, and then there was a lot of law and order problem and other things which we had to handle. So these are all new experiences for us. But it shows that the biodiversity richness of the waters of along the coast of Maharashtra was seldom recognized earlier. Now we have a fairly good understanding of the species diversity along our coast. So when I talk about the Maharashtra model, the basic elements of that model are the following. First is the legal, institutional, and policy initiatives. I will elaborate on all of this a little later. Then the capacity building and outreach program, community participation, building partnerships, innovation and resource mobilization. So Mangrove Cell is the institution which was first set up as a dedicated unit for conservation of mangrove forests, but it was also given the mandate of conservation of coastal and marine biodiversity. So it was established in January 2012 as a very, very, very small unit. And when I joined, I was the only person manning that organization. But it grew later into a much bigger organization. And we also has branched off into a fresh organization called the Mangrove and Marine Biodiversity Conservation Foundation, which has also been playing a very critical role since its inception in 2015. Before I get into all these aspects, I would like to touch upon one significant aspect of the mangrove conservation policy which evolved in Maharashtra, which is the landmark judgment of the Bombay High Court in a PIL filed by the Bombay Enviornment Action Group. And in the PIL, High Court of Bombay came up with a very, very interesting set of directives. This was on 6/10/2005. and it declared a total freeze on the destruction and cutting of mangroves in the state. And it also said that regardless of ownership of the land, all construction taking place within 50 meters on all sides of the mangroves are to be forthwith stopped. And no development permission is to be issued by any authority in respect of any area under mangroves. And the last one is very, very significant because it said that all mangroves on government land in Maharashtra is to be declared as protected forests and handed over to the forest department. Till this point, the mangroves on government land were under the control of the revenue department, mostly, and some organizations like municipal corporations, CITCO, etc. So, forest department practically had no role to play till this judgment came. But even after this, the direction was that there would be satellite mapping of the area, starting with Mumbai and adjoining areas. And then this will be handed over to the forest department. And by 2008, about 5,469 hectares, including nearly 3,998 in Mumbai and Mumbai Suburban District, and 1,471 hectares in Navi Mumbai. This combined with the combined area of 5,469 hectares were handed over to the territorial wing of the forest department. This was in 2008. But as we proceeded, the government realized that mangrove conservation is somewhat a specialized task for which the forest department is not really equipped. At least the forest department of Maharashtra was not really equipped to handle. So we needed a separate dedicated unit with a possible lateral entry of specialists and which could devote sufficient time for the conservation of mangroves. Because mangrove conservation was a very, very, very hot topic, I would say, in Mumbai. And all the media would cover mangrove destruction in all parts of Mumbai. And slums were proliferating. So there was all-round concern about mangrove conservation in Mumbai. And this resulted in the creation of the mangrove cell in 2012, when government realized that there needs to be a specialized, dedicated unit for conservation of mangroves. But along with that, the mandate of marine biodiversity conservation also was given to mangrove cell. So now I will deal with the different elements of the so-called Maharashtra model. First is the legal, institutional, and policy initiatives. To start with, as I said, the direction from the High Court was that there should be satellite mapping using high-resolution satellite images. So Mumbai was mapped, like you can see the picture on the right side. And then gradually, step by step, the rest of Maharashtra coast was mapped. And then you have 1:5,000 scale maps like this, prepared for each and every coastal village of Maharashtra, which contain mangroves. So the red one indicates sparse mangroves, the green one indicates dense mangroves, and the blue ones are creeks, and the ash-colored ones are mudflats, and the rest are non-forest, non-mangrove areas or Gauta villages. So like this, the entire mangrove area of Maharashtra was mapped. And then came the declaration of reserve forests. Remember, the High Court directed that mangroves on government land should be declared as protected forests. But then government realized that protected forests don't really give that much protection. So you need to elevate the status of these mangroves into reserve forests. So that was a policy decision taken by the government of Maharashtra without any, compelling directive from the High Court. This many people don't realize. And that way, I have so many things to say about the support of government of Maharashtra in building up mangrove cell, especially, in the initial days, it was Mr. Praveen Pardeshi who gave a lot of support in creating mangrove cell and in helping mangrove cell in overcoming the major teething troubles. Then he was succeeded by Mr. Vikas Karge, who also very genuinely supported the various activities initiated by Mangrove Cell. So the difference between protected forest and reserve forest, if you don't know that, in protected forest, rights can continue to accumulate. Whereas in reserve forest, once it is declared and the settlement of the rights take place, then no further rights can accumulate, which means that it is frozen for once and all. And the continuous vulnerability of the protected forest is that way plugged by declaring them as reserve forests. So after that, several protection measures were put into place. A special task force for Mumbai was created called the Mumbai Mangrove Conservation Unit. It was headed by a forest officer. This was done in 2000. And then several forest stations were established at strategic points. And there was still a problem of sufficient staff, forest guards and foresters. Their availability was a big problem. So we hired security personnel from the Maharashtra Security Corporation. About 118 people were put in place to look after the issue of protection of mangroves in Mumbai alone. So that really changed the scenario quite a lot, because till then the mangrove areas were quite vulnerable, because there was this constant influx of people coming to Mumbai, and mangroves would be the immediate casualty because other areas are not so easily available. So this was put to rest, and then the encroachments which had taken place after 2005, after the High Court order came, to say that there should not be any diversion of mangroves for any other purposes. So we had to remove about 6,000 illegal hutments, often inviting a lot of criticism and resistance from very powerful lobbies. But we had a good team, and they worked very hard and removed almost all encroachments in the city of Mumbai and Navi Mumbai, in Thane. And we also raised mangrove nurseries. This was one of the initial activities of the mangrove cell. And a lot of nurseries were raised, a lot of plantations were raised. You can see the growth of plantation activities. And in 2018 and 2019, as part of the 50 crore plantation drive, we planted quite a lot of mangrove seedlings in many parts of the Maharashtra coast. Of course, we also concentrated on conservation of a few rare species, like Heritiera littoralis, as I said, represented only by a few trees. Xylocarpus granatum, even Bruguera gymnera is somewhat rare. So these species, in association with some NGOs and some universities like Kolhapur University, we raised nurseries of these rare species, and that activity is continuing. But a very important milestone in the mangrove conservation history of Maharashtra is the creation of the Mangrove Foundation. The full name is Mangrove and Marine Biodiversity Conservation Foundation of Maharashtra. It was established as a registered society in December 2015, with Honorable CM as the patron and Honorable Forest Minister as the chairman. When it started, it had a corpus fund of 116 crores, which was the fund received as a mitigation fund for the Navi Mumbai airport. Gradually, through different sources, we could raise the corpus fund to about 316 crores by the time I left. And I'm sure it will continue to grow in the future years, which gives a kind of solidity and financial stability to the mangrove conservation activities in Maharashtra. So this is also a very important element of the Maharashtra model. So this, because this society can also mobilize resources from inside and outside government. So a lot of money was raised from the CSR funds of important companies. People like ICICI Bank, Volkswagen, and many others contributed to the CSR fund for raising mainly mangrove plantations and some livelihood activities. So in 2019, we had received about 6 crores from CSR funds alone. But this organization's role was not just mangrove conservation, as the name indicates. It could also concentrate on marine biodiversity conservation initiatives, sustainable livelihood activities, and it could play a huge role in promoting research, education, and awareness. And one great thing about the Mangrove Foundation was that it was given the flexibility to hire professionals. So it could hire, specialists in the field of livelihood development, administration, finance, research and capacity building, and marine biologists, civil engineers, CSR coordinators, then marine ecologists, mangrove ecologists. So all these people could be hired by the Mangrove Foundation. So it became an altogether new organization equipped with the necessary skill set and the necessary professionals and given the sufficient flexibility, financial flexibility and financial stability. So that is what really is driving the mangrove and marine biodiversity conservation works in Maharashtra. So even during COVID time, when the government funding and support has somewhat dried up, the foundation could carry on its own. And some of its livelihood activities have really reached the coastal communities and are giving a lot of direct income to the local communities, especially the coastal women. So there were several institutional arrangements starting from the grassroots level. We created the mangrove co-management committees at the panchayat level. So it is the equivalent of joint forest management committees, which we find in the other forest areas. We call it the MCMCs, the mangrove co-management committees. And this includes only the coastal wards of the coastal panchayats. And within this mangrove co-management committees, we form the self-help groups of beneficiaries. If there are already existing self-help groups, we take them as such, or we prompt them to create self-help groups, especially of women, to deal with the livelihood activities. Now, I'll talk about the livelihood activities later, but most of them are aquaculture-based livelihood activities. But these are technologies which are not familiar to the coastal communities. They are good at fishing, but they are not really good at growing fish. So these technologies were scattered in different national level institutions, and we associated with them and partnered with them and brought this technology to Maharashtra. But this technology had to be transferred to the villages. So we needed knowledgeable intermediaries. That is why we recruited about 40 fisheries graduates who acted as project associates for giving technical guidance on these aquaculture activities, and they would interact with the community, teach them about the technology, whether it is crab farming or oyster farming or cage culture of fishes. The technology would be passed on to the local communities, and any problems that arise would be the feedback would come back to the Mangrove Foundation. So they acted as intermediaries. Each person was given 2 to 3 villages where they could intensively work. And at a later point of time, we also recruited the forestry graduates for promoting mangrove nurseries and mangrove-based other activities, conservation activities. And for each district, a livelihood specialist was recruited. And all of these people would report to the core team at the Mangrove Foundation, headed by the Deputy Director, Livelihoods. And there's a Deputy Director, Research also, who looks after research and capacity building. So this was the institutional structure which was formed for starting the livelihood programs. Besides this, there were a couple of committees appointed by the High Court, which was headed by the Divisional Commissioner, which had all the district collectors, the district police officials, and municipal corporations and other pollution control board and other government bodies and some NGOs as members. And they mainly deal with complaints outside the forest areas because the forest department does not have the mandate. So these complaints have to be handled by the revenue authorities or the police authorities. So to coordinate that, there is a committee at the level of the commissioner, and then there are committees at the level of the collectors, and at taluka level there are committees headed by the tehsildars. So these are the institutional structures which came into existence for mangrove and marine biodiversity conservation in Maharashtra. As far as hello, is it audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as capacity building and outreach activities are concerned, we must remember that when we started, the staff of Mangrove Cell did not have any knowledge about mangrove conservation. We never ventured into the coastal areas for conservation of mangroves or marine biodiversity. Of course, there are a few stray cases of plantations raised by Maharashtra Forest Development Corporation, and also the social forestry wing sometime back mostly in the 80s and early 90s. But that was it. The staff who were working in the coast areas did not have much knowledge of the mangrove conservation and the aspects of mangrove conservation. So we had to do a lot of training for the staff. This picture is of the fisheries graduates, the project associates which we recruited. They also helped in doing a lot of training and exposure. They also got a lot of exposure visit. And so for the staff of Mangrove Cell, the territorial staff of different coastal divisions who are working in the coastal areas, they were all given different trainings. The field guide was published for their understanding of the mangroves. And then Mangrove Foundation could get this lateral induction of specialists. So that is how we worked on the capacity building. In outreach also, we could give it a big jump by when we started the Coastal and Marine Biodiversity Center at Navi Mumbai, close to the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary, where people could come. A lot of students come there and understand the mangrove and marine biodiversity issues. And many of them get the opportunity to go to the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary and watch flamingos which come there in tens of thousands. And in the urban areas, we conducted a lot of clean mangrove campaigns involving students, NGOs, local residents, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. So these are ways of reaching out to the people, involving them in mangrove cleaning, involving them in mangrove plantations by voluntary agencies. Sometimes even the corporates, they send their employees to do mangrove plantations. So this is how we link with the local communities. But our greatest, I would say, the flagship program now is the community-based livelihood programs. Many of these programs were initiated during the UNDP GEF project, which we implemented from 2012 to 2017 in Sindhudurg district. So we could do a lot of experimentation and standardization of procedures and protocols as part of this this UNDP project. And there was another externally aided project called the GIZ project, funded by the German agency, which helped us create the Coastal and Marine Biodiversity Center in Airoli in Navi Mumbai. So the community participation, we basically approached the state government after successfully implementing this program as part of the UNDP GEF project in Sindhudurg. Based on the success of these programs, a new scheme was launched by the government of Maharashtra, which includes activities like crab farming, mussel farming, oyster farming, cage culture of brackish water fishes like sea bass, pearl spot, Itropolis suratensis, and ornamental fisheries and community-led ecotourism activities. So these are the activities which are bringing a lot of income to the communities now. So their interest in mangrove conservation has become really, really much more deeper than it was before, because they find a direct connection of their living with the mangrove conservation or the conservation of the environment surrounding them, like creeks or the sea. It is important that these local communities get totally integrated with mangrove and marine biodiversity conservation. So this is crab farming. These are huge crab. This is not from our farm, just to show the possibility of the potential of this crab to grow. It can grow into about 1 kilo in about 7 to 8 months. And at 1 kilo, it can eat even above 600 grams. It can fetch a price of 1,000 rupees per kilogram. So this can be a very good source of income for the local community. So the mangrove area is enclosed with a net, and then the young crablets brought from a crab hatchery in Tamil Nadu, they are seeded in this mangrove area. Of course, there are a lot of challenges in bringing this from Tamil Nadu. The seasons vary, their production season and our introduction season, that varies. So now there is a plan to create a multi-species hatchery, including crab, oyster, mussel, and sea bass. And an area is identified in Sindhudurg, and a plan is being developed by the mangrove cell. So this is a very lucrative activity, but only thing is there has to be total dedication by the local community. They have to feed the crabs regularly and look after the well-being of the crabs. The tidal water flow has to be ensured. So every day it calls for the regular routine monitoring of the activity. But then there is this bivalve farming, which is somewhat different, because all along Konkan coast, you will find that women are engaged in collecting oysters from the wild. It's a back-breaking job. They spend a lot of time collecting these oysters. It's like more like a subsistence activity. They may earn a small income of about 50 rupees or 100 rupees a day by selling the surplus that they don't require for their families. So you can see a lot of them doing this all along the Maharashtra coast. But the oyster farming activity was introduced by us with the help of the Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute. So the old oyster shells are hung like this on a nylon string, and then bamboo rafts are put, and then they are hung there. And during the season, the young oysters they come and settle. The spat comes and settle down on the old oyster shells, and in about 8 to 10 months' time, they grow. So this is an activity which does not require daily monitoring by the women, but at the end of the season, they get a very good harvest, and the investment is also very minimal. But and the efforts on their part is only initially directing these bamboo rafts and then weaving these oyster shells into nylon ropes, and finally occasionally checking whether things are all right. Similar activity is mussel farming. There are many mussel beds in Maharashtra which have actually disappeared, and there was an attempt to do this mussel farming. I wouldn't say that it was very successful, but I think this holds a lot of promise and potential. But the most promising, the most remunerative activity so far has been the cage culture of fishes. So this kind of cages with GI pipes or PVC pipes and floating drums and nets hanging from that was introduced with the help of Central Institute of Brackish Water Aquaculture, and it's a very popular activity now. During this COVID season, from the fish harvested from these cages, they could get an income of nearly 24 lakhs to the local community, which all went to the local communities, because the investment is all made by the government as part of the scheme. There is a 10% beneficiary contribution, but apart from that, the rest of it all goes as their profit. So this is primarily, local coastal women are engaged in this activity, who are generally underemployed or are in disguised employment. So this activity is really very popular. It has got a lot of scope, and they then realized that there is a need to keep the creeks clean. This activity and the oyster cultivation activity that ensured that the creeks are kept clean, and a lot of toilets sprung up along the banks of these creeks, because the villagers thought that if we are growing fish, if we are growing oysters in this creek, then we have a reason to keep it clean. So that is another positive byproduct of this activity. Another activity which we promoted was the ornamental fish culture. So what we do is we create these self-help groups of women, and they are given basic facilities like a shed, a few tanks. Hello?
Yes.
Is it audible? Any problem?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. So we give them a shed for each self-help group where they can conduct this activity, and a set of tanks and the filtration unit and fan. So basic equipment are given. I think there is some crosstalk. Hello?
Yes, please.
Please switch the mic. All of you, please switch off the mic. Hello? Is it clear?
Yeah, you're clear, sir.
Okay. So they were given these tanks and filtration units, and in Airoli in Navi Mumbai, we created a clownfish breeding center from where clownfish could be raised and then could be supplied to these coastal villages. But then this activity has not really picked up as a marine unit, because there were challenges. Only the required number of clownfish was not produced. It is still progressing. It's a work in progress. But then all of these units which were given training, they were taken to successful ornamental fish culture units in Tamil Nadu and other states, and they learned the art of ornamental fishery. And many of them have raised freshwater fishes, which are much more easier. Eventually, we want them to raise clownfish and other marine fishes, which are in greater demand in the market. So, as far as clownfish is concerned, if the hatchery becomes fully functional, then 1 month old fishes can be given to these SHGs. They can grow them for the next 2 months and then earn a lot of profit in the process, because the fish is sold to them at 25 rupees, but the buyback is at around 100 rupees or 150 rupees. So there's a huge value addition in growing these fishes for 2 months. So this is also one activity which Mangrove Cell wants to promote as a primarily women's activity. And then there is the community-led village ecotourism. We create boardwalks like this in mangrove areas. And there is this group which you can see. This is called the Swamini group in Vengurla, who are now engaged in taking tourists to the mangrove areas. The uniqueness of this group is that these women who are illiterate and semi-literate, they have learned the scientific names of all these species, mangrove species. They can explain the utility of this species to the coastal communities. For example, which fruit is eaten, which is good for treating which ailment. All these are explained by these women. And they row these boats manually, and there are no engines to these boats. So ultimately, this is a great experience for the tourists, who find that not only the interesting part is not only the mangroves and the otters that they see in the vicinity, but the experience of going with these very enthusiastic women. And finally, they are given a good seafood meal in the middle of the day. So this activity is really picking up. And now this group realizes that the mangroves are giving them sustenance. And therefore, a vested interest is developed for the community in the conservation of mangroves. We are trying to develop many such groups all along Maharashtra coast. I talked about this the solid waste removal from mangroves. Especially in Mumbai, you will find that the entire mangroves of Mumbai are completely choked with litter. And the litter comes with the high tide, and all the things that we throw into the sea come back and settle down in the mangroves. So we launched a campaign of removing this litter with the help of NGOs, volunteers, residential communities. And altogether, 8,000 tons of solid waste was removed. And these were picked up by the Bombay Municipal Corporation's pickup vans, and they were disposed through their regular mechanism. And even Mangrove Cell won a Limca Book of Records certificate for conducting this activity. So this is one way of protecting the environment and also demonstrating that this can be done through volunteers, and also giving a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment to the people who love the environment, especially the urban communities. So all these activities which Mangrove Cell did could be done with the help of partnerships. I talked about the UNDP and the GIZ, who are the external funding agencies, and they also become our partners who give us the flexibility to experiment with a lot of innovative programs. But besides that, there are institutions, mainly institutes. National Institute of Oceanography is conducting the expedition to the Angry Bank, which is about 67 kilometers away from the coast of rich corals. And all these institutes, including some NGOs like Bombay Natural History Society, and then there are organizations like Wildlife Institute of India, Sally Valley Center for Ornithology. All of them helped us in implementing various programs, because you need to be technically supported by knowledgeable people. So these partnerships are really very key to the Maharashtra model. Many of them had earlier not worked in the Maharashtra coast, and the Mangrove Cell's partnership with them actually provided them the opportunity to work along the mangrove coast, along the Maharashtra coast. And these are not the only ones. There are so many others. For want of time and space, I have not included all their names. And the innovation resource mobilization, I talked about the Corpus Fund of Mangrove Foundation, which comes to about 316 crores now, with contributions from various agencies, including the airport, the Trans-Harbour Link, the Coastal Road, and there's a widening of the Washi Bridge, bullet train. All of them contributed. Then we got about 15 crores from the state budget. Campa funds were available. Then from the mandatory CRZ requirements, some funds were made available for mangrove plantations. CSR funds I already mentioned. Then there are funding from the district agencies under the innovative program. Urban bodies supported us. And then there was the externally aided projects. Now the Green Climate Fund project is awarded to Maharashtra and 2 other states, which will start operating from later part of this year or early next year. That is a 6-year project which will carry on very innovative projects, programs. But these are all programs which are basically a scaling up of the activities which we did as part of the UNDP project in Sindhudurg. So as a result of all this, the mangrove cover of Maharashtra registered a very significant increase. So when we started the Mangrove Cell in 2012, the mangrove cover had remained stagnant from 2005 to 2013. I mean, from 2005 onwards, it was stagnating at 186 square kilometers. But by 2015, it registered an increase of 36 square kilometers, going up to 222 square kilometers. Then by 2017, there was a very substantial increase of 82 square kilometers, so taking it up to 304 square kilometers. So in that, Mumbai suburban district, if you see, there was a huge jump from 48 to 64 square kilometers during that period. Because I'm mentioning Mumbai suburban because that is the most vulnerable part of the mangrove resource of Maharashtra. Sorry. And eventually it increased to 320 square kilometers. So if you take the baseline of 2013, there is a 72% increase in the mangrove cover of Maharashtra. So in 2015 and 17 assessment, Maharashtra was number one, way above any other state. And in 2019, it is just below Gujarat. This graph shows the general. So it's an all-time high. From if you take the figures from 1987 onwards, Maharashtra's mangrove cover, sorry, has registered an all-time high. And then as part of the institutional mechanism, legal and institutional and policy framework, we created the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary right in the urban center of Mumbai. In the Thane Creek, which is Asia's largest creek, which separates Mumbai from Navi Mumbai. The picture that you see, that the green shaded portion is the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary. It is about 1691 hectares, half of which is the mangrove area and the other half is the creek area. And along with that, we created this Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary. With the sanctuary, we created the Airoli Coastal and Marine Biodiversity Center. A very display and high-tech display, which people could really appreciate. A lot of visitors come there for the boat ride because every year thousands and thousands of flamingos come to Thane Creek, and for the people of Mumbai, this is a real treat because many people are not realize there are so many flamingos. At one point of time, the count was more than 120,000 in this Thane Creek. So we organize these boat trips with keeping into consideration all the safety aspects and all the recreation aspects for the tourists. So this is a huge hit now among the tourists because of the COVID. It is stopped now, but as soon as things clear up, we'll be able to resume. So this has brought a lot of people close to nature, and they've also realized the importance of mangroves and the importance of conserving this unique ecosystem. This is the picture in the center. And along with this, we also got a lot of areas where coastal and marine biodiversity conservation are involved. Coastal birds, otter population surveys and conservation works, sea snakes, and works related to conservation of and population assessment of dolphins, finless porpoise, etc. For example, we conducted a survey of the cetacean population along the Sindhudur coast. So they counted 572 Indian Ocean dolphins, 65 finless porpoises. They encountered 1 blue whale and 8 Broodies whale during this 6-month boat-based survey. If you look at those pictures below, you will find that every dolphin has got its own unique, signature dorsal fins. So with that, you can identify each of them separately. The last one is the finless porpoise, which doesn't have a feature, so it's difficult to count them. You count a lot based on the encounters. But dolphin count is almost very accurate. It's like tiger stripes or the buckmarks. And one of the first things we did was to do the turtle conservation works. We have sporadic nesting of olive-ridged turtle in Maharashtra coast. So a lot of villages, we engaged local people to identify the nests and protect them from all kinds of threats, including human threats and threats from fox, etc. Even when the turtles, after hatching, when they move towards the sea, a lot of birds come and pick them up. So these threats were taken care of by the local community. Earlier, people even used to eat the eggs, and when an individual was entrusted with the responsibility of looking after these nests, then we found that a lot more beaches where nesting was earlier not reported, they also witnessed nesting. It is not that they were not nesting earlier, but the reports were not coming to the forest department. So through this method, we could safely protect the nests in almost 3 times the beaches which were earlier protected by the forest department. So this activity has spread to all parts of Maharashtra coast, and now we have a good turtle transit center in the northern part of Maharashtra coast at Danu, where injured turtles are treated, and when they become fit, they are released back to the sea. And there are a lot of NGOs working in that. And then we have also created a group called Marine Respondents. These are basically interested individuals from various professions and backgrounds, including veterinary surgeons, professionals, teachers. So this network helps us in handling the stranding incidents, whether it is turtle, dolphin, or even whale. These people are ready with their enthusiasm, and many of them are quite knowledgeable about marine conservation. Some of them can even guide us on the procedures to be followed. So this network is now becoming stronger and stronger, and that is a very, very deeply networked with the Mangrove Cell and the Mangrove Foundation. So there have been several cases of marine mammals stranding along Maharashtra coast. This one is a blue whale, which I witnessed in 2014, I think. And this was stranded live in Alibag coast. 8 hours people tried to push it back, but it did not work. It died on the beach. But this experience gave us an opportunity to save 2 more whales in other parts of Maharashtra coast subsequently. But there were other cases of British whale, sperm whale, pinless porpoise, humpback dolphin, resort dolphin. They were all stranded. Most of them dead stranding, and a couple of live strandings were also seen. So through a trial and error process, now the Mangrove Cell and the Mangrove Foundation, along with the network of NGOs, have really, they are better equipped to handle such situations. There are now a couple of stranding management centers which have also been established by the Mangrove Foundation. And to protect the coral wealth, we don't have reef corals here. Of course, there are a few scattered coral growth in Sindhudurg district near Malvan, which was earlier declared as a marine sanctuary. So in this area, the coral bleaching had taken place, and we thought we can enhance the coral growth here through artificial transplantation of corals. And with the help of an institution called Sugandhi Devadasan Memorial Research Institute in Gulf of Mannar, artificial transplanting was done, which I think is still in an evolving stage. It was partially successful. Some corals are really growing well, but we need to do more such experiments and standardize the protocols to make this a very standard practice. But as part of the upcoming global Green Climate Fund, coral transplantation activity is one of the most prominent activities in that project. And I talked about the Angria Bank expedition. This is a submerged bank about 60-70 nautical miles away from the Maharashtra coast. So we conducted the first expedition with the help of National Institute of Oceanography. And this area revealed rich coral growth. And another expedition was conducted in 2019 with the help of Wildlife Conservation Society, which is an international NGO based in Bangalore. And this second expedition, the partner was Center for Marine Resources in Cochin. So they also brought documentation of the coral growth there. This was not there in the coral map of India earlier, but now, since there is a restriction that the Wildlife Protection Act says that you can have marine national parks as sanctuaries only within the territorial limits of India. But this is outside the territorial limits, but within our exclusive economic zone. So exploring the provision of the the Maritime Zones Act of 1976, Mangrove Cell has now sent a proposal to Government of India to declare this as a designated area for conservation as provided under the Maritime Zones Act. Let's hope that this will be India's first designated area in the marine zone for conservation. There are a lot of people who are engaged in snorkeling, and some people who are acting as scuba diving guides, although they were not officially trained. So an institute called Indian Institute of Scuba Diving and Aquasport came up in Sindhudurg during this period, which I'm talking about. And using their resources, we trained about 20 local youth up to the, not the initial stage, but up to the 5th level, that is the dive master level of scuba diving, where they could independently take tourists to the coral areas, because they are also equipped with the knowledge for rescue in case there is an unforeseen incident. So these guys are all local, and there were, some of them were snorkeling guides. They were given this training. Each training would cost, each one would have to pay 2 lakh rupees. So it was beyond their capability to pay that much. So we sponsored 50% of the cost, saying that, putting a condition that during your mandatory diving hours, you should bring all these abandoned fishing nets, called the ghost nets, which are actually huge death traps for the marine animals. So they brought 1.5 lakh square meters of nets during the training program. And many of them are interested in continuing this activity. They formed their own foundation and carrying on this activity of removing ghost nets whenever possible. With the Fisheries Department, we conducted a lot of programs like joint patrolling, in which forest personnel and fisheries personnel would go together in a patrolling boat and oversee the implementation of the Maharashtra Marine Fishing Regulation Act and also the Wildlife Protection Act. But then we went one step ahead and we empowered the fisheries officials under the Wildlife Protection Act. So now they can also take cognizance under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Which also, these are all replicable activities which other coastal states have probably not done, some have done. And if they have not done, it is possible for them to replicate these activities. And another interesting scheme that Mangrove Cell implemented with the help of funding from Mangrove Foundation is the compensation scheme for saving endangered marine animals. This was in vogue in Gujarat earlier. I don't know whether it is continuing still. But we pay a compensation of up to 25,000 in case an endangered marine animal is entangled in the net and the fishermen had to cut the net and release. So after this scheme was introduced, and a lot of training and orientation and awareness programs were conducted all along the Maharashtra coast to bring awareness about the scheme. And now, hawksbill turtle being saved. It's one of the rare species of turtles being saved by the fishermen. We got reports of leatherback turtle. We had never received a report of leatherback turtle on Maharashtra coast. And then several reports of saving endangered fishes like sawfish, guitarfish. So a number of fishermen have been compensated. The incident is processed initially by the Fisheries Department, and then for payment it is passed on to the Mangrove Foundation. So this is how it works. So with this scheme, a number of endangered animals have been released by the fishermen. As part of the UNDP project, another interesting innovation was in the field of introducing square mesh nets for troll fishing. So in the troll fishing, we find that about more than 70% of the catch are actually juvenile fishes, which are not of any market value and which are basically thrown back to the sea or used in fish feed, fish meal plants. But a very, very simple innovation by modifying the cord end of the fishing net. You see the on top you see the traditional diamond-shaped mesh, diamond mesh net, which actually stretches. When it stretches in the sea, it becomes even narrow and don't allow the juveniles to escape. But only the cord and the last part of the net where all fish accumulate. If that is replaced with this square mesh net, then a lot more fishes can escape. So we found that there's at least a 20% reduction in the catch of juvenile fishes. And the economic loss, whatever little economic loss is there, is more than compensated by the saving in the fuel. So this proved to be a very big eye opener for the trawlers. And at one point, all the fishermen, all the trawlers operating from Sindhudurg converted into this square mesh net. And Fisheries Department made it part of the policy, and it mandated that all trawlers should henceforth use square mesh nets in the trawlers. So these are basically some of the highlights of the programs. I've talked about the Green Climate Fund project, which is a very ambitious project, which Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh and Orissa will be implementing in the next 6 years. And this is India's biggest Green Climate Fund project. Only the second project. The first is really, I heard it is yet to take off seriously. So this will be, in effect, the biggest and probably the first project to be implemented, Green Climate Fund project to be implemented in India. So this gives a lot more, stability to the programs of Mangrove Foundation. A lot of departments will be cooperating in this, will be partners in this. There is Agriculture Department, Fisheries Department, Pollution Control Board. A lot of people will be involved in this implementation. The second aspect is that at the moment, this livelihood activities are catering to about 2,500 families along the Maharashtra coast. But you can easily target about 10,000 families. And that can happen in the next 2-3 years. In which case, the income that will come to the community will be in several crores. And that is direct income which will actually go into the families of the coastal communities. And the coastal women who are underemployed and who feel they are not part of the family's income earning potential or part of the family's decision making, they can be productively engaged in these activities. But for this to materialize, we need a multi-species hatchery for crabs, sea bass and bivalves, which I hope will happen in the next 2 years. But then this aquaculture is a very fast-growing area of technology, and there are frontline technologies in different parts of the world. It will be possible to bring some of these technologies to India and adopt this along the coastal areas of Maharashtra. Involving in these mangrove co-management committees and involving them in conservation and involving them in the livelihood generation. That is the model that we have been trying to develop. There is a lot of demand for creation of major mangrove parks. There are 2 parks which are already contemplated and for which the preparatory work is on. And mostly the important political executives, when they visit Airoli and see the Coastal and Marine Biodiversity Center, they are excited to do similar parks in other parts of Mumbai and other areas. So with the logistic constraints, Mangrove Cell has now narrowed down to 2 parks in Mumbai, and all of them will be completely different and catering to different kinds of clientele. And some of them are adventure-based parks, some of them are purely conservation-based. So this is one area where a lot of work can happen. And marine biodiversity conservation and research is in our country a very, very, very underexplored area. And there's a lot of scope for doing innovative research in that, innovative conservation activities in that. And I think we have only taken baby steps towards that. I think the potential is enormous. And globally, this is really becoming a major thrust area for biodiversity conservation. To identify many biodiversity hotspots outside the territorial waters, and we need to figure out how to conserve the marine biodiversity of these areas with the resources of the state and the center combined, and maybe with the help of advanced technologies and with the help of interested partners. So thank you very much. This is in brief what I've been referring to as the Maharashtra model. So I'm open to any kind of clarification.
Thank you, Vasudevan sir, for a very nice and informative talk. There have been some questions posted by the participants, which I will post to you. You can answer them. Mr. Umesh Dotikar, the Dotikar sir wants to know that, sir, in the last 7 and 8 years of your maiden working in this cell, do you find any attitudinal changes in coastal people towards conservation as well as protection of mangroves? Can you share a short experience of such kind to pinpoint this change?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And if all this work has not led to attitudinal changes, I would say it was not really worthwhile to do that. So I'll give you a few examples. First example is when we first harvested the crab from our first crab farm. I was just standing there, and one major commented, "Mangrove se pehli baar kuch fayda ho raha hai." That reflects the attitudinal change. You see that the mangroves are important, and it is important to protect them, and it is also that this shows that mangroves can give us livelihood. This is one. And second example, I would say I refer to that Swami group. They were not involved in conservation or anything. They were just a group of women who wanted to do something, and we gave them education about mangroves. And of course, they drove the whole thing by learning the names, scientific names of mangroves, and by also understanding the utility of mangroves, the medicinal benefits of that. And they are good at explaining they learned rowing for this livelihood, and without telling their husbands that they are going through the pain of learning, the physical pain of learning rowing. So that's one angle. But what about the Maharashtra State, wherever we have mangrove co-management committees, the NCMCs, where livelihood activities are happening, there is definitely a positive response. And people want more and more such activities to spread. Naturally, because now there is this direct livelihood source that we are offering. And also, people realize when the compensation scheme that I talked about, in that fishermen earlier were reluctant to cut their nets and allow the fishes to escape, for the turtles to escape, for the dolphins to escape. But they are doing it now because there is a compensation scheme. Even if they don't get compensation, they are willing to somehow help the animal escape because they think that is vital. And another example I can give you in Sindhudurg, when we use this program of reducing the abandoned fishing net, the ghost nets, collecting the ghost nets. The incidence of throwing the abandoned fishing nets in the sea, that has also come down drastically. Fishermen themselves tell us that now we don't do that. We know that we are not really good. Now people are recovering so much of these ghost nets that we are realizing that we do not have to practice. And the trawler nets, when we introduce the square mesh net, people realize that this can be a good long-term conservation activity, which will not affect them economically so badly. And in any case, there is a compensation to the loss through the savings in fuel. So all these are examples of the attitudinal change. And more people want our livelihood activities to happen, ecotourism to happen. A lot of politicians have said that we want such similar activities in our area. We want parks where a lot of people can go. So our activity, mangrove health activity, will not happen in isolation. It happens in close integration with the local communities. So I think the attitudinal change is very much visible.
So another question from Dotika sir only. How serious is the seismic danger to big cities like Mumbai if mangroves are destroyed for construction by the way of heavy reclamation activities? How do you see this in your point of view and experience as a marine biologist?
Seismic danger, I am not really aware. I am not an expert on that. But one can say that the flood control, mangroves have a very huge role to play because they are like huge bathtubs which can absorb the water like a sponge and slowly release into the sea. So in flood control, it's very important. We have seen the impact of mangroves in control of tsunamis and coastal storm surges in many parts of the country and even many other countries like Sri Lanka, Indonesia, etc. So that also is important. And now that we realize that a lot more cyclonic storms are going to happen in the western coast than it used to be because of the climate change and other factors. I think we need this protective all along our Maharashtra coast, wherever possible, with mangroves. So that realization is also now coming. Earlier, people thought Mumbai is not going to have any tsunami or cyclone. But recently we witnessed, a couple of cyclones which really threatened Mumbai, not too much damage. So that kind of coastal storm surges and cyclonic storms can happen anytime. And the mangroves are one of the protections for us. And Mumbai as such is a city created out of 7 independent islands. And it will naturally have a soft coast. And any protection measure, these are called nature-based solutions. These are the blessings of a city like Mumbai. So these nature-based solutions have to be protected to the extent possible and enhanced wherever possible, so that we take care of these natural calamities. As far as city is concerned, I have not really come across any threats. Maybe others will be able to.
Suresh Thorat sir wants to know whether all mangrove areas have been handed over to the Forest Department by the Revenue Department.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good question. Actually, it is estimated that around 17,000 hectares of government land is there where mangroves are there, out of which more than 15,000 hectares are already handed over. So what is remaining is districts like Raigad and parts of Thane, where you have agencies like SIDCO, and still they are in possession of some areas. And some areas are in possession of other government agencies and municipal corporations. So I would say 90% of the area is already handed over, and whatever is remaining will be done in due course in maybe in the next 1 or 2 years. There is a question of not leaving an area.
Thorat sir further says that you have done a very pioneering work and you deserve all the praises for it.
Oh, thank you, sir. And your support has been there at least as long as you were there.
Janelle Singh sir wants to know, for marine biodiversity conservation, what are the focus area identified for such conservation actions?
From Maharashtra's point of view, we have a few at Sindhudurg, and there are other coral areas, some scattered coral. So coral reef conservation is a very important area. And Green Climate Fund will be focusing on artificial transplantation of corals. Then the sporadic nesting of turtles all along the Maharashtra coast. So now the protocol is somewhat standardized. And every year it has to go on. There was a very sensational news that in Vasudevan beach there was nesting, and people claimed that it was because of the cleaning activity that they took up. So it was a very sensational news. But apart from that, you see nesting activities all around the Maharashtra coast. And with a little bit of support for the nest, I think a lot more hatchlings will be able to reach the sea. And then the third thing is you have all kinds of marine mammals. You have the dolphins, different dolphins, mainly the Indian Ocean humpback dolphin, and then there is a spinner dolphin. There are the Roseau dolphins. There are so many dolphins which are found along Maharashtra coast. But mainly the humpback dolphins are like resident populations. But areas like the Underi, Kanderi area, they are actually facing a little bit of threat to the fishing population. The porpoises are not so smart. They get caught in the fishermen. We need to create a lot of awareness among the fishermen. Then there are accidental catch of marine fishes, including some sharks fishes involved. So our compensation scheme has really helped. But then there is no ending this awareness campaign, and we need to know constantly be after the fishermen. And also the marine biodiversity, we have to encourage fishermen to do more eco-friendly practices, the ecosystem-based approach to fishing, or what is called the IU fishing. So these are some of the activities. But I see a lot of potential in conserving areas like Angria Bank, which are far away from the Maharashtra coast, outside the territorial waters, but in the exclusive economic zone. And as per the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, it is the responsibility of the coastal country to protect the marine living and resources within the sea. So that is one area where we have not really done anywhere, because all our conservation activities have been confined to the territorial waters. I mean, the national park, the sanctuaries, etc. They are all in the territorial waters. So two things we need. One, we have to identify areas which are rich in biodiversity in different parts of the sea. That needs a lot of exploration. We have made a small beginning, but we need to explore a lot more. And then declaring some of them as designated areas. And eventually, we may need amendment in the Wildlife Protection Act to allow the national parks and sanctuaries to come up even in the. I think the inspiration for that direction came from the mangrove cell. And so far, no state has really taken up that activity. But a lot of states were in touch with us, like Karnataka, Kerala, Gujarat. They've all been toying with the idea of creating such cells. But many states have experience in conserving mangroves, like Sundarbans, like Orissa, Uttarkanika. Then Gujarat has a lot of experience in use mangrove plantations. Andaman Nicobar Islands has the best experience. They probably have mangroves also. So they've all done great work in mangrove conservation, moral conservation. But then these are all now treated as the regular work of the forest department. But here the approach is different because we, as I said, we created a dedicated unit, so it could build its specialization. It could get a lateral entry of talent. It could build a robust financial base, and it could also implement programs for the low-cost communities, which eventually gained more support from the government. So that is the model which and of course the institutional legal part, of course, by declaring the entire mangroves as reserve forest. I don't know whether any other state has done that to this extent, declaring mangroves as reserve forest. So now we are targeting every inch of mangroves from government land as reserve forest. So when that is achieved, I think it will be a major milestone. So I think the states eventually will realize that the coastal states will realize that it is worthwhile to have a mangrove cell or a coastal ecosystem cell, by whatever name they call it, especially concentrating on mangrove and marine biodiversity conservation. Thank you, sir.
Since all the questions have been answered by Vasudevan sir, I will hand over to Dr. Shivaji Jawan for a vote of thanks.
Thank you all for your patient listening, and I really enjoyed interacting with all of you. And thank you once again, Wildlife and Bee Protection Foundation, for giving me this opportunity.
Sir, Shivaji sir, unmute your mic first. So you need to unmute your mic.
Yes. I would like to thank Mr. Vasudevan for such an elaborate description of the journey since 2002. And Wildlife and Bee Protection Foundation has been fortunate enough to see the modest beginning of the mangrove cell in the SRA campus. From there, it developed into leaps and bounds and has taken the current shape. And sir, under your leadership, this program has really made a phenomenal progress, and it has been set as an example for our nation. As you said that the Maharashtra model is the one of its kind. I would like to thank you and congratulate you for all your efforts all these years, and handing over this this prestigious what you call a legacy for establishing further avenues under the Green Climate Program. I would like to thank all the dignitaries present for this session, Mr. Janel Singh, Mr. Suhas Kumar sir, most of the other dignitaries who are present with us, and thank you for making this a successful session, and thank you all of you for joining us in this fifth session, and we will see much more of you all in our forthcoming sessions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vasudevan sir. Thank you all the delegates who have joined. Thank you very much. And thank you, Nader, for coordinating the session. Thank you, sir.